The Trump camp, including Kellyanne Conway, have been explicit that they think the more chaos, the more violence there is in American streets, the more misery there is for Americans, the more it helps them in this election. And so it was not surprising when the president and other speakers of the RNC this week kept talking about mayhem and violence in our cities. But we should be very clear about what kind of violence is actually happening in one of those cities, Kenosha, Wisconsin. The spark for what we have been seeing in Kenosha was the violence of a white police officer named Rustin Sheskey. He shot a black man, Jacob Blake, in the back, point-blank range, 7 times in front of his 3 children after Blake was reportedly trying to break up a fight, according to witnesses and his family. It was that shooting that led to both peaceful protests and also genuine civil unrest in the city of Kenosha this week. We saw cars and buildings burned and businesses broken into. And then the most serious violence on the streets of Kenosha in the wake of the police shooting of Jacob Blake, that came from a 17-year-old white Donald Trump fan. Back in January, he sat in the front row at a Trump rally. He described himself as part of militia protecting Kenosha businesses. On Tuesday night, amidst ongoing protests, he went from his hometown, Illinois, to Kenosha, and he was out on the streets of Kenosha with a military-style semi-automatic rifle. And that night, he shot 3 people, and he killed 2 of them. We should note who those victims are, who those people are, whose lives he allegedly took. His first victim was a 36-year-old man named Joseph Rosenbaum, who leaves behind a 2-year-old daughter. His sister described him as a devoted father who loved to draw and play jokes on everybody. The 17-year-old second victim was a 26-year-old man named Anthony Huber. Now, Huber chased down the shooter after he shot and killed Joseph Rosenbaum in an incredible act of self-sacrifice and heroism. This is how Anthony Huber's girlfriend described Huber's actions yesterday.
I just want to say that Anthony Huber was one of the most amazing people to ever walk this earth. He had nothing but love in his heart for this city, and that's why we were out here last night. And he took down an armed gunman with nothing but his skateboard.
Anthony Huber was an accomplished skateboarder. Friends said he was a great father to his girlfriend's daughter, and that he was always talking about having to be home and take care of his kid. And think about what Anthony Huber did. He saw someone shoot another person at a protest, and then he threw himself in a live grenade. He chased down that shooter with a semi-automatic rifle to try to apprehend him, to stop him from committing more violence, and for that he paid with his life. He's the hero in this story. But now that Trump-loving shooter who claimed to be in a militia is being celebrated by some on the right. They're justifying, even supporting his actions. And by doing that, they're ensuring that there will be even more like him. I'm joined now by someone who's written extensively on racist militant groups, including their ties with law enforcement in more than a dozen states. Michael German, a former FBI special agent, who's now a fellow with the Brennan Center for Justice's Liberty and National Security Program. Michael, it's great to have you. And I've learned a lot from your writing on this topic. What does it do to watch this 17-year-old shooter who killed 2 people, it seems quite clear, who has now been charged with homicide, be celebrated, defended by huge swaths of the right and the pro-Trump media?
It's dangerous. And this is something that I've been warning about, and the Brennan Center has been warning about for some years now, as we've seen an administration that has given breath to this movement and seems to suggest that that what they're doing is targeting the president's enemies. When the president says that anti-fascists are the enemy, it energizes these fascist groups and encourages them to act in a way that risks life and limb, unfortunately. And it's a problem that I think is going to continue, and we don't see any effort. In fact, one of my biggest concerns is there doesn't appear to be an effort from law enforcement to really understand the dangerousness of these militants.
We've seen in multiple cities, we've seen people arming themselves quite showily, openly carrying, often long guns, like the kind the shooter in question had, and being treated with a kind of bonhomie by police who are looking after protests, who do not act that way with a lot of the protesters. In this case, we saw this young man essentially attempt to surrender after he had just shot someone in front of a bunch of police cars, and they rolled right past him because they just didn't seem to care. Like, how common is that? What does that say to you about that dynamic on the streets in these protests?
It's particularly dangerous and confounding for me coming from law enforcement. There's so much intelligence about these far-right militants that we knew in the 1990s has apparently been lost. We knew that when far-right groups went to have rallies in areas, they would target places they knew there was political opposition to draw that opposition out so they could attack them. And law enforcement was very good then about ensuring they didn't have that opportunity. And to see since 2016 that law enforcement stands back and allows this kind of violence to occur, it allows them to recruit and to organize and to work on their tactics in a way that ultimately will harm law enforcement directly. I mean, one of the important things to recognize about this, since the protests following the George Floyd murder have occurred, 2 law enforcement officers have been killed by far-right militants. And that they don't recognize this is a threat to them directly is a complete failure of law enforcement intelligence.